Hi, this is Anthony. Welcome back to my show. It's been about a week since I've done a Q&A episode, and I've gotten a number of messages from people. In fact, probably more than I could put into one comment and Q&A episode, but let's launch right in with some messages that I've received publicly on my videos in the comment section. Generally, if the comment is short and well composed, I may show a screenshot of it, even if I don't read it out loud. If somebody makes a good comment, but they have a lot of spelling errors or grammatical issues, I may edit it or not show their name simply because I don't want to embarrass anyone here. So I just wanted to mention that. The first comment touches upon Sheridan, Peterson, and DNA evidence from the tie. As I've mentioned before in a couple of videos that I've done concerning Sheridan Peterson, I think he's a person who had the skills to do the hijacking. It kind of looks like the drawings that we have of Cooper, but in my mind and many other people's, it's clear that he was not Cooper. Besides having much lighter skin than Cooper was reported to have, it seems as though Sheridan Peterson was in Nepal at the time of the skyjacking. As I mentioned in a previous video specifically about him, proving information about that does not seem to be in the public domain. It appears that the FBI was satisfied that he was in Nepal at the time, but do we have scans of his passport that shows visas and entry and exit stamps from Nepal? Not that I've seen. Has the FBI released their file on Peterson describing agent seeing, confirming evidence that he was in Nepal? Not that I've seen. Does this prove anything one way or the other? Not really. I tend to believe that he was in Nepal, but who can prove it? I can't. A few other things that I wanted to touch upon concerning Peterson and the Cooper identification in the skyjacking is that if you're taking the time to watch my DB Cooper videos and videos from other people, you're probably very interested in this particular incident. Like myself, you find the skyjacking and the mystery surrounding it intellectually stimulating. I love unsolved mysteries like this and trying to figure out which clues are relevant and which ones are red herrings, even if they're inadvertent red herrings. But we have to remember that this was a very traumatic criminal act. At the time, there were politically motivated hijackings. Eventually, some hijackings would result in the destruction of airplanes. This was a time of great danger for crews and airliners. For the crew, this was not a picnic. This was a life and death situation. From what I've read about Tina Mucklow, she later joined a convent and disappeared for a long time from public life. My understanding is that she's still extremely reluctant to discuss anything about the skyjacking, and my understanding is that this incident profoundly affected her mentally. I say this for two reasons. One, that when we sometimes start slipping into thinking that Cooper was a romantic rogue who got away with the big one, we have to remember that he was a criminal that committed a crime that was spectacular, but ultimately, is he any different than a guy who robs a liquor store and ends up with a bunch of money? So he's no hero, and he's somebody that really affected probably all of the air crew in a very psychologically detrimental way. From everything that I've read about Sheridan Peterson, he was a true humanitarian. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing in Nepal, but it may have been along humanitarian lines. I understand from what I've read is that he supported civil rights early on and later on became a teacher in California. You look at his pictures and interviews and he seems like a very friendly, nice guy. He doesn't seem like the type of guy that would commit a crime that would so traumatize people like Tina Mucklow. And one would think that even if for some reason he was able to get here from Nepal without being detected, and he really did commit that crime 51 years ago, that he would have regretted the harm that he did, and on his deathbed tell his heirs that he had a sealed envelope that he wanted sent to Tina, apologizing for what he had done to her. But obviously that didn't happen. And I believe it didn't happen because I don't think he was D.B. Cooper. By the way, some people brought up that they thought perhaps he worked for the CIA. That could have been his real alibi for not being in the area and therefore unavailable to have committed the Cooper skyjacking. But we don't have any evidence that he did work for the CIA because usually there isn't any evidence for that, even when people do work for the CIA. Lastly, on the topic of DNA from the Cooper tie, excluding Peterson as being Cooper, again, we do not truly know that the FBI is confident that any DNA on the tie is from the skyjacker. And could we convince a judge and jury in a court of law that in fact the FBI had excluded Peterson as Cooper based on DNA evidence? I think that from what we and the Cooper sphere know, we couldn't make that statement in court. Again, It doesn't mean that it didn't happen. It doesn't mean that Peterson could be Cooper. I'm just pointing out that like many of the facts in the case that we think we know, we don't actually really know that much that we can all agree on. And let's think about the tie and DNA for a moment. I have made many videos discussing some of the issues with the titanium particles on the tie. Of course, I want you to watch those, so I encourage it. There are all different videos and cover different aspects, so if you're interested in that subject, please do watch all of them. There are a lot of issues that are by no means settled in that respect, but I think that we have to remember that if the tie belonged to Cooper, and it had belonged to him for a while, it wasn't something that he picked up at a thrift store when he got to Portland. But let's assume that it was the tie that he wore for many years at work. Ties are great at picking up things, and men do not usually launder their ties unless they get noticeable stains on the tie, usually from food. Since this was a clip-on tie, having a lot of food getting spilt on it is probably less likely because he could have easily taken the tie off when he would sit down for lunch. However, when men are wearing ties and they are working in perhaps a laboratory at close range, they are going to get their own DNA on each other's ties just from speaking at close range. So my point here is I think we need to be very cautious in believing that DNA retrieved from the tie must only belong to Cooper. Certainly, if DNA can be retrieved and through online genealogical research a connection become established, it may not identify Cooper through the DNA, but it could narrow down the circle of people that worked with Cooper and therefore lead to a better, more accurate identification. Okay, that's all enough for the Sheridan Peterson topic for today. So the next comment is from somebody who calls himself John Hancock, which may be his real name, or perhaps he likes insurance companies named after founding fathers. In his comment he states, "This is a very poorly misunderstood analysis, period, mainly due to the fact that the gentleman's reasoning is from the perspective of civilian with no military experience. So what you all should be asking is how I know Mills has no military background without knowing anything about the man himself. I'm ex-military, used to be a paratrooper, and his complete lack of hands-on knowledge is so obvious it's painful." So he has 2 points here that he wants you to consider. How you all should be asking is how he knows that Mills, that's me, has no military background without knowing anything about the man himself, meaning me. Well, if somebody would have watched the video, I talk about my background, and I don't mention that I have any military experience. I think that it could be concluded that I do not have any military experience since I didn't mention any, although I talked about other aspects of my education and working in Russia. So yes, I'm coming at this as a civilian with no military experience. But I'm not really sure how that's relevant because in the next paragraph he talks about him being a former paratrooper. That's great. Thank you for your service. But what is it that I said in the video where I'm talking about using logic that he takes umbrage with? Where I as a civilian and he as a former paratrooper have any differences in our interpretation of the situation. I would have loved for him to have stated what it is that I got wrong, if anything. That's why I ask people to comment. Sure, I get short comments from people telling me that I'm silly or I'm stupid or that Dan Gryder already solved it, so why am I wasting my time? But none of those comments really move the base of knowledge for the rest of us as far as enlightening us about something that we're missing. Anyway, I'm sorry that Mr. Hancock found my video to be painful to watch. I can certainly sympathize with him after watching Dan Gryder's latest work. Here are two that have some similarity, so I'm going to put them together and then answer it. I'm in the camp that the hijacker died on impact. However, I find the case still fascinating, and I'm always willing to hear evidence. You brought up so many issues with this current theory, but you did it respectfully. And then this comment, which I've gotten a number of times from various people. Give me one reason to believe that he didn't survive when the police and FBI found nothing. 0. And they went through 2 states with a fine-tooth comb. So again, I'm a big believer in being transparent with people about assumptions and biases and things like that. My conclusion at looking at all the evidence that I've seen and giving it a lot of thought is that it's my belief that he likely did not survive the jump. Probably ended up in the Columbia River and expired probably very quickly. The plane following Flight 305 did not see anybody jump out of the parachute open up, although many people speculate that due to the weather conditions, that if the hijacker deployed the parachute, that it might not have been observable by the following plane. But whatever the parachute did, if it opened up or not, if he landed in the cold Columbia River, I think that he would likely have not had long to live. Is that a theory that I can prove or that I push in my videos? No. But I do state in many of my videos that I believe that it's unlikely that Cooper did not survive. And therefore, any of the main suspects cannot have been Cooper, because all of the main suspects put forward are people who survived past Thanksgiving 1971. And I think based on how other cases that have been broken by DNA recently, that most likely Cooper was somebody who was never on the radar as far as being a suspect. When one is looking at reasons that Cooper didn't survive, just because no body or parachute was found, I think that the biggest piece of circumstantial evidence, and it might even be strong enough to hold up in court, is that money was in a bag that was tied to Cooper. The last thing that the flight attendant saw was Cooper tying the bag of money to himself using cords from one of the parachutes that he didn't take. We know that close to $6,000 was found approximately 9 years later in the sand on the north side of the Columbia River at a place called Tina Bar. While there are few people who believe that Cooper survived and then, to throw off investigators, planted some of the money there, I find that this scenario is extremely unlikely. It took 9 years for the money to be found, and it was found randomly by a young boy digging a hole in the sand. I think most people believe that the money somehow ended up at some location in the Columbia River, and that it was dredged and then deposited on the sandbar at some point in or after 1974. I think that if the money ends up in the river and it's dredged up from the bottom, and the money was in a bag tied to Cooper, one can assume that Cooper ended up on the floor of the Columbia. Why wasn't his body found? For the same reason that other people's bodies that are known to have been in the Columbia are never found. This is a daring and romantic and exciting case. If this was a case where a drunk driver drove off a bridge into the Columbia River and they found his car but the body was never found, some people would conclude that he staged his death and jumped out of the car before it splashed into the water. But the more reasonable explanation is his body was flung out the door and ended up on the bottom of the river or slowly made its way out to the Pacific Ocean with no real mystery. Okay, I think I'll end here. I don't want to make these too long or people won't watch until the end. I do appreciate hearing from you, and I do appreciate everyone who's subscribing and clicking the like button. Again, I have no agenda with these other than trying to make entertaining, thought-provoking videos that get people to look at issues involving the Cooper skyjacking in the most logical manner, while understanding that we do not have complete information, and what information we do have is often open to interpretation as far as the complete accuracy of it. Thanks again for watching. I really do appreciate it.